Good evening, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to the Erudition Network. Welcome to this Thursday's Black History and Knowledge session. I am your host, Eddie Phillips, and I am live. This is an interactive session, so you are welcome to ask questions, opine, as we discuss history and things that are not necessarily covered in history in a factual way that educates and illuminates and allows for a better understanding of our nation's history and Black history. We are on here, I'm on here every Thursday to do that. I am a public historian, or what some people will call an independent or public historian, which means that I am not owned by a university. I do not ascribe to a particular university, and I can share and go into history with you without feeling as if I am being obsequiously controlled. And so I want you to be able to ask your questions and know that you're going to get a fair and fact-based response and direction when you watch this program. I am happy if you are joining us for the first time. I thank you for joining us. If you are a person who is going to watch this and you watched it 20 times before, then you kind of know what we're going to do over this next hour. This, as I said, is an interactive show. It is live, and it allows you to ask questions. So please feel free to do so. Please feel free to share and get other people to join the broadcast. We want you to be here for the lives if you can, because it allows for a more robust discussion and allows us to get away from made up, regurgitated history that is devoid of rumor. I hate history that has been pushed to us, or things that have been pushed to us, and we have not done proper research or vetted what it is that we're talking about. And many times I am online, I am on the internet, I am on social media spaces, debating, I shouldn't say debating, going, answering questions and trying to get people to read sources and have a better understanding and not lean to their own understanding. So we're here tonight for another session. I'm going to give a couple of moments for people to roll in, because sometimes folks roll in a little bit after we start, and we start to get people in. I'm hoping that we start to get more people here for the live. I understand that I come on a Thursday. I understand that there are people who watch football. We're at football season, and we can get very, very interested in those things. And by all means, utilize your time as you see fit. But what I would like for us to start to do is to prioritize our history also. Give a little bit of time, even if you watch the replays of this program on YouTube or Facebook, to actually start leaving questions and start kind of getting into what it is that we should know. We are living at a time, as we're going to discuss tonight, where we better get a better understanding of our history because it's being presented to us in ways that are entertaining, that are biased, that are xenophobic, that are revisionist. We are recycling old history, modernizing it, but basically it's the same old tried and true history. Um, and we're seeing more and more of that every day. We just saw the presidential debates over the last couple of days. And one of the main things that I have been going back and forth with different individuals on is this idea of how we are aligning ourselves um, with this lunacy of allowing ourselves to follow um, and get caught up and regurgitated um, history that is not true. Um, During that presidential debate, one of the biggest, I guess, viral things that have gone out is the idea of immigrants eating dogs and cats and things like that in Springfield, Ohio. And as a public historian, as a historian, the first thing that it made me think about was these baseless claims um, are regurgitated. They're not new. You know, you can go back until into the 1820s. You can go back into the 1910s, the 1950s. You can look at times during the Mexican American War. You can look at times even when Irish people arrived here on the shores of America. And every time um, these things happened, there was always these lies about these savage, evil, illegal, or not American people um, who were killing your dogs and raping your women and stealing your property, and they're just no good. They're here to do evil. They're not good people, right? And history is rife with all of that. Um, it is sad because at the bottom of it, what we find a lot is that African Americans, blacks, um, they were the ones who were really um, given these nasty monikers, right? And it's just sad. You can go and look at the Italians, you can look at the Irish, you can look at anyone who has come over here, the Asians, whatever Asian community that they come from. These are old tropes. These are things that people use politically. It is the reason why we had a law that pushed Asian people out from being able to come into the United States for decades. It is the reason why we saw Irish people being killed coming off of boats, right? We got to stop this type of thing. And we got to stop with the lies and stop regurgitating the lies and using them over and over again because we don't know where the history comes from. And we can lie to ourselves. Some of us lie about what it is that we research. Google is a tool. AI, things like Perplexity, Chat, whatever, they are always used as a research tool, not the end all that be all. It is up to you to do the research, right? Because if we don't do that, right, then we're going to lie. We're going to lie. And we have been lying. A lot of us are conditioning ourselves to share the lies. And that's not good. That's not good because what that's doing is it's creating a hostile environment for people of other cultures who don't deserve that. Who don't deserve that. But it's happening. It's happening. And so I want us to start doing better with that, start learning. I want us to be open about the fact that a lot of these things, as crazy as they sound, they're not new. They're not new. I think that, good to see you, Pastor Ray. I'm so happy that you're here with us tonight. We have to stop with these lies. For people to get up in debates, for people to co-sign it in our and on our media, in our news, in our politics, it's crazy. It's crazy. Every culture who has come over here who weren't considered an American by 13 colony standards was said to have had economic struggles, to be prone to theft, right? And to have unusual, exotic even eating practices, right? There were things that these immigrants brought over in order to eat different vegetables, not just animals, that people thought, oh, well, we don't eat those. But here's the thing, and I tried to state this the other day. I want to say this before we get into our questions. I always try to open this session up with questions. When we got to the point of everybody struggling, and I tried to make this point the other day, when we got to the point of, say, the Great Depression, as people made their way further west, during the migration periods, during the Dust Bowls, a funny thing happened. People struggled. They struggled. So what they did is they started to hunt things that they typically wouldn't eat other places. You know, the rabbits, the possums, the coons, right? Bats, skunks, turtles, beavers, right? Anything that could produce meat to feed your family. And here's the funny thing. We didn't find it hostile then. We didn't call them untamed, uncivilized, unsanitary. We didn't call them evil. We didn't say these things about those people because those people, right, were the great American pioneers. We didn't say those things about those people when they were starving during the Great Depression. Now, we only said those things when we wanted to stoke fear, when we wanted to separate people. People were starving during the Great Depression. They took anything and everything they could to feed their families. Go look up what the ingredients of a bone stew is, where you take the bones of an animal, it didn't matter what animal it was, and you put it in water and you boiled it and boiled it and boiled it over and over again, as many times as you could, putting a little bit of ingredients and salt, whatever you could, to feed your family. What about Hoover stew? Hoover stew was anything, rice, pasta, lentil, whatever you could get that you would put in a pot with whatever kind of meat, whatever kind of sauce or whatever you could make with it, and you would stir it up, and that's what would feed families when they had nothing else. People were eating whatever they could, but that wasn't evil. That wasn't evil. That wasn't uncivilized. Because at the time, right, everybody was struggling. And I guess that was okay. That was okay. The same former slave owners who would sit there and eat robust meals, but after the Civil War, they went and got black maids and black women and black people to cook for them foods that anything. That's where you get your chitlins and your soul food and all this other stuff from. And this became a part of Southern behavior. But we didn't call those people evil, untamed, uncivilized. We got to stop with the disgusting nature of using xenophobic, racial evil communication to describe people. And we have to stop and understand that when we read our history, when we study it, we start to know, we start to make connective tissue on what is said and what has been said, and realize, oh, that's not new. That's true too. Meatloaf. It's many things during those trying times that people, they ate. But we are allowing folk, and I'm not saying that Haitians are eating cats. That was unfounded. But it's not something that hasn't been said before. Freemen were said, and escaped slaves were said to have gone in and killed family pets and all this. This stuff is rhetoric that has been used for centuries in this country. And before this country, it was said about the Moors. It was said about the Africans. It was said about everybody. Anytime any person or any culture came into another culture, these horrendous things and claims were said. But it's how we perpetuate them, how we keep them moving. And we've kept them moving. And I want to talk about that tonight. But before I do that, I'm going to ask you guys, just like always, I'm going to give you a couple of moments to ask questions. This is the part time in the program where I usually will come in and I will open up the floor for any historical question, thoughts, concerns, things that you want to discuss, or questions that you may have come on, things you may have seen during the week. Any of those, I give you a couple of moments to be able to do that. And while you're doing that, I'm going to send out a little bit of a notice to let people know that we're on again. So please feel free to go in and drop in any thoughts or opines or anything that you may have that you want to discuss or you are curious about tonight. Anything you guys got, it doesn't matter. I'm always open to whatever you would like to discuss. I guess y'all don't have anything. Y'all don't have anything? Okay. All right. Well, I guess we don't have any questions tonight. If you do have questions throughout the program, we can go ahead and we can do that. But I just wanted to leave that open for you, as I always do. Tonight, I want to talk about some things. One thing I want to talk about is kind of related to what I just discussed with you a moment ago. This idea of what is Americanism? What is America? They said that if you worship with emotion and excitement, it was deemed as evil because that worship was solemn, quiet, and with no emotion. Yeah, I've heard that too. And what's amazing is that the as you look at majority of the African cultures, right? They have always, no matter how far you go back, I'm working on this new book and I'm looking, no matter how far you go back or where you go, you see this rhythmic, this desire to worship in a way that is exciting and showing love and commitment to God, and with dance, with music, it's a celebration kind of thing. And it's funny because when you look at that, the way that was done, and you look at European history, you see that there is a definite difference there, and how they solemnly and they say things and they give so much reverence to it. And it has to be quiet and has to be, and so it's an amazing thing to look at and to see that as rambunctious and they're doing more than what they should do. So yeah, that is definitely something that we should consider. We look at. I want to talk to you all tonight about Latinx. Latinx. If you don't know what a Latinx person is, because it is it's kind of a newer term, not really, but I guess right now, um, it's a newer term in how we use it. But it is basically um, kind of a neutral term, kind of a term that basically shows that there is a connection with Latin America that is multi-tiered. It is not just Spanish. It is not just what you would consider to be a Latino or Latina. Um, there is a lot of African. Yeah, say it again. A lot of African in the Latin people of South America, and it should not um, be something that is lost to us, because the slave trade showed us that more blacks went to South America than they came to North America. So when you look at the people who we call immigrants, useless, and all these things that we're saying about people, we seem to forget that these are our connective ancestors too, or they have ancestors too that are just like ours, right? That they have the same African background that we have, even though it has in many places been denied to them. It has been suggested to them that that is not true. And you can go down in Latin America and or in South and Latin South America, and you can see people who are just as dark as some black folks that are up here. But why do we make it that and say to them that they don't have stake in the game with us? Why is that? Why do we feel that we can deny them or say that they're just criminals, right? They're just criminals. They share the same, in many ways, lockup procedures. They have been demonized, and they've been the recipients of racism in many of the same ways that we have. When the war on crime came in the 60s, late 60s, they also were under the gun. They had Latin leaders who were also being profiled and manipulated by things like COINTELPRO. You know, in a study in California, back in the 80s, it was found that African Americans and Latinos, right, they made up the majority of the inmates in California state prisons. And as they grew throughout this entire country, they also dealt with the racism, even when many of them were citizens, just like you. But we divorce ourselves from this. We go along with this supremacy, colonialist mentality that they're not a part of us. I have said on many occasions, if people were to realize the power, that's the key, the power that you have as Latin people and Black people together, there's almost nothing you could not accomplish. And it is the reason why many people try to keep us apart. It is the reason why many people don't want us to come together. There is so much things that we share in common in our cultures, in our understandings, in the way we raised our kids. But somehow we got out of that. When you heard people like Frederick Douglass in the late 1800s said they wanted to break the chains of slavery all over the world. See, we have this mentality, ladies and gentlemen, that we only are a part of America. And that's it. But our ancestors, our leaders, Carter G. Woodson, Frederick Douglass, Martin Luther King Jr., he goes on and on, Malcolm X, they understood that this mentality of the other was worldwide. And it was understood that in order to free ourselves, we had to come together. I often talk to people about Jose Maria Morelos. Jose Maria Morelos, in 1850, he wrote a letter to President James Madison. And he was the leader of the Mexican War for Independence. And he wrote a letter to President James Madison, you know, the same Madison who was responsible for helping to create the Constitution of the United States. He wrote a letter to Madison, right, telling him that if America would allow freedom for blacks, slaves, and if America would completely embrace civil rights and racial equality, it would be one of the strongest nations in the world. Nothing would be able to stop the Americas from achieving something that had not been achieved. He talked about the Spanish domination that had been put on Mexicans in the same way that the Americans had felt the pressure from the British government. He talked about in his letter on how to come together would allow people all over the world to break those chains. His letter was greatly ignored. And Madison, of course, did not see Mexican independence in the same way as he saw American independence, and that they could not be held equal to each other. Fear, ladies and gentlemen, pushes even men who consider themselves to be righteous to do evil things and to follow evil things. When Morelos was writing these letters, there's a man, he's another president, and he's the son of the second president of the United States, John Quincy Adams, whose family is lauded as being these abolitionist-minded people who did not see the slavery of blacks as something that was God sanctioned and something that was righteous and something that should be, right? Well, John Quincy Adams was Secretary of State in 1816, 1819. He was Secretary of State, and he was the person who gave the pretext or the idea for launching the first Seminole War. And if you don't know what the Seminole War is, then you can't really understand how he basically was a hypocrite to what it is that he said his family believed in. The Seminole War started because it was believed that indigenous people, civilized tribes, and some Spanish were giving shelter to runaway slaves and actually encouraging them to run away. It was also believed that even all the way down to Mexico, that this was being allowed. So John Quincy Adams sided with who would become his political rival, Andrew Jackson, to start the first Seminole War, when Andrew Jackson blew up what was called Negro Fort in Florida, killing men, women, and children. John Quincy Adams excused this mentality by saying, you know what? This is okay because the people who were allowing the slaves to escape, the people who were doing it were evil. They were not American. So they didn't have American value. Sounds familiar? They were illegals, ignoring the fact that at the time America did not own Florida. And so we went into a sovereign place and killed people who were under the protection of a foreign government. And he compared, when asked this by men like Morelos, Adams said that the American struggle is different. It was honoring, full of honor. It was a war of free men, but the South American war was savage. These were savages fighting a savage war. And that there could be no resemblance between the American Revolution and theirs. His contrast was that they did not have the intelligence, the temperament, so they didn't deserve to be compared. That's history. That's fact. John Quincy Adams, who later on would, after becoming president, would go into Congress and laud Congress and say to them how blacks needed to be freed and that we need to understand the Mexican after the fact of multiple Seminole Wars, of the putting down of multiple slave revolts. His righteousness didn't return to him until his old age, when we all start to realize that we have to go see our maker. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm making this point to you historically because I think sometimes we do the same thing. It's not saying that we don't read our Bible, that we don't have a moral compass. It's the fact that we fall into the rhetoric of the time out of fear. Adams was afraid that the revolutionists in Mexico would hold to free the blacks in the South and cause a revolution that would destroy white men and property owners in America. That's it. That's what it was. And his fear, right, was above his moral upbringing by his mother and his father. It was above the idea that we should not enslave men and women. No, we need to make sure that we are safe. Fear. And we're seeing this fear even today. We're seeing this fear as it's being pushed in our political spectrums. We're seeing this fear being pushed over social media. People telling us here in Colorado that Venezuelans are taking over apartment buildings. That in Ohio, they're eating dogs and cats and pets. That they're murdering innocent people to a point where a person who's son was killed by immigrants, said he wished that his son, this is crazy, had been killed by a white man so that his son's death could not be politicized unfairly to demonize others. It's amazing to me for African Americans also who can see that you share culture, color, and upbringing in many ways with people of South America, but you will turn your back on them and say that they're taking your jobs. I'm going to give you another historical example of that. When the Irish came over in boats, they were used as basically just above indenturitude, above chattel slavery and slave labor. When they were coming over during the Civil War, they were getting off boats and being signed into the Union Army to go fight in the Civil War. That's why you had so many Irish brigades. And they died for something that a lot of them, they would tell you in their writings and in theirs, they didn't even believe in. So when we had the draft riots in New York, it should have been of no surprise. Rich men, real Americans as they called themselves, would barter black labor against Irish labor. We'll pay an Irishman 50 cents to do this job. And then the Irishman will go get this job. And then they would hire a black person and say, well, the black person's doing it for 25 cents. So if you want to keep this job, you're going to have to take lesser pay. So the Irishman would take lesser pay. And then he wouldn't blame the rich man or the business owner. He would blame the black, who was just trying to feed his family, who was trying to survive just like he was. And then it became crabs in a barrel, holding each other down. And when we look at the draft riots in New York, what we find is that they were so angry that they didn't care if they killed men, women, or children. They didn't care if they killed the rich. They were angry, the Irish, and tried to burn the city down. They had to send in the military to stop them from taking over New York. Go read about the draft riots. But we act as if these manipulative business practices don't still exist. They still exist. I saw the Haitian leader in Springfield, Ohio, saying that now the Haitians in that community who came there as refugees, who are legally there, not illegals, were being harassed in their jobs. People are asking them, oh, you eat cats, you eat dogs? They're harassing their children as they go down the street. Because we care more about the rhetoric and the falsehood and the regurgitation of false history out of our own, out of someone else's fear that we did take upon ourselves and push back out to the world. Everybody's not a criminal. When blacks were freed from slavery and the freemen were all over the country, one of the justifications for the Klan as it rolls up was we have to stop the Negro from going into these communities where our young where our wives and our young daughters are. They're going into the communities and they're stealing our cattle. They're killing, they're taking things off of our land. This is all the same rhetoric used again and again and again and again. And if our ancestors had not had the wherewithal to go establish towns, to go and say, regardless of what you're going to do, we are productive Americans. And they had more productive towns than the white and commercial towns that had been established for years. And this is why you saw towns like Rosewood and Tulsa later on to be burned down. This is why you saw white folks go in and lynch and murder and kill and take land. And it wasn't just the South. It was West. It was everywhere. And it was because we pushed the idea of fear. We talk so much about the American settler, white settler, who would go out and travel the lands and in their covered wagons. And me and my wife just watched the movie the other night, and they would go out there and they would go get their land. But here's the thing: we don't talk much about the Mexicans and the Latinx and the blacks who were there, or the indigenous people who were ran off of their lands, who were legal landowners and citizens of this country, who were told that that land, even though they paid for it, wasn't theirs. And you had free rangers who would sit there and take their cattle and go let them feed on the land that they stole and burned down or killed to take away from blacks, because they knew that they didn't have the same rights. And in order to do it, what we had to say was, well, they're breaking the law. They're breaking the law. They're vagrants. They're migrants. They're not us. And this connection that we have, we continue to sever it and sever it and sever it. Tina, every worker wants to make a livable wage, is still not realizing these bonds. People are at wit's end with these old problems. Nothing new under the sun. There's nothing new under the sun, but we have to understand what we're accepting. What are we accepting here? And this is why I believe we got to be better. We got to do better. Go back and read your history. I cannot, I get angry when I see people say, and I've seen it more often now. I showed my son, we don't need to know our history. We don't need to dwell on what happened back then. We don't need that. Foolery. Because you never hear, that'd be like King Charles of England saying to his family, you know what? We don't need to know what our ancestors, who they were, who are buried in these tombs and these honorific places all over Europe. We don't need to do that. We should forget where we came from. Let's just focus on the fact that right now we are the monarchs. That's foolish. Because one thing about it, you're never going to give up that power, that authority, whatever little bit it may be. You're not going to do that. You want people to remember your honorific ancestor. You want people to remember what your family did in wars and places of honor. You don't believe that? Look at some of the presidents that we've had in this country. They got to those positions a lot of times because either they had family or political connection established from something that had been done in the past. Andrew Jackson was a war hero for the Seminole Wars. It eventually led him to the White House to become president of the United States. John Quincy Adams traveled with his father during the Revolutionary War. He eventually became a president of the United States. Don't think that your past, your family's history is not important. Because if you knew who your family was, you'd be less likely to want to embarrass them unless you're a Kennedy. But even when we watch that situation play out right now, you see people on one side of the Kennedy family like, nah, he ain't a part of us. Why? Because these families choose someone to lead for every generation. You know, I was telling my son, you don't hear about the Rockefellers, but you don't lose all that money. But if you go and you look at endowments, if you go look at things that are being purchased and done in this country, you always see that Rockefeller name. You'll see that Carnegie Foundation name. You see these men and people of industry who had billions of dollars back in the day, or what was equivalent to billions of dollars today. That money didn't just go away. That's old money. We just saw recently the Rothschilds said that they have about $1 billion. You saw the new generation of Rothschilds, that they're $1 billion family. The Rothschilds were the biggest bankers over in Europe. They financed a lot of things. For World War I, World War II. That money doesn't just go away. That history doesn't just go away. And my point to you is they know their history and they teach their family their history so that they never forget. We do. Right. We must all do better because this is a universal problem spanning generations. Test us to recall history, to repeat it with greater losses for knowing it's doing it. Yeah, I agree. I agree, Tina. The sad part is that Haitian immigrants were asked to come to Springfield because the town had lost 30% of its population and they couldn't fill the factory jobs in the area. They were invited there. Preach that, Pastor Reza. Yes. And that the other part of it is that many of those Haitians who are there, they were educated. They were educated. But they came to this country. You know, I remember going over to Bahrain and I was laughing when I was over in Bahrain because I had a health issue over there. And the doctor who saw to me spoke perfect English. Perfect, right? You'd have thought that this dude, right, was from New York, Chicago, or whatever, right? Perfect English. He had degrees on his wall from American schools. And I went in there, I was like, man, I was like, you know, I mean, no offense, but you speak really, he's like, oh yeah, I spent a large part of my life over in America. And he bought that education back over to Bahrain at the request of the king because his family had participated in the revolution, just like my another one of my people who I knew over there, Kawari. So my point to you is, right, people are assuming that, oh, well, they're just immigrants or refugees. They don't have any education. They don't know who they are. You don't know who these people are. It is an assumption made off of something that you perceive that Americans tend to continue to push that ain't right. It's not right. It's stereotypes. It's xenophobia. Because I never hear I never hear people say the same things about folks who come from, say, Sweden, or folks who come from Norway or Finland. And I'm not clowning any of those people, but I'm just going to let you know, when they come over here, it's never assumed that, oh, they're going to be over here eating and killing and murdering and whatever. It's always these people who Donald Trump said were crap hole countries. He said that word out loud and people heard it and they regurgitated and they went right along with it. What's my point to you all tonight? Study. I always say this: study. One of my, a friend of mine, he was going back and forth with me online earlier. And one of the things that I'm always going to say is, I'm not going to argue with you when it stops being productive. The discussion is no longer productive, then it's pointless. But at that point, what I'm going to do is tell you to increase your knowledge and your understanding. So I suggested for him several books, and I'm going to suggest those books for you all here tonight, because I truly believe that in order for us to be better, we got to educate ourselves. We got to educate ourselves. We got to pray for an understanding and pray that God gives us where we need to go to get this understanding. Maybe it's here at Erudition, maybe it's someplace else, but at the heart of it, we got to do better, because what we're doing is not working. It's not working. And it's too much regurgitated foolery out here that ain't helping no one. It's not doing anything for anybody. So I'm going to suggest a couple of books here. I'm going to put them in the chat because I always suggest a book. That's just me. But here are a couple of books. You may have some of them. Paul Ortiz has a really great book. It speaks about our Latinx connections. It's a really good one. I have another book here. I don't think I put that in there. I just happened to look over at it, that I've suggested a couple of times too, by Leslie Rout Jr. It's called The African Experience in Spanish America. Great book. Go open your, because I'm starting to get to a point. I wanted to do 3 books: early world, Middle Ages, and then come forward. But I'm realizing that I'm going to have to spend some time in South America. I'm going to have to show us these connections more than I can do on an hour program on a Thursday, because we are losing this connection. I see so many people go out and attack Latino people and immigrants who are just simply doing what a lot of our ancestors did. And I want us to expose that history. I want us to remember the fact that the Mexico allowed Black Seminole Indians and Black people to police the borders of Mexico and Texas, and allowed them to come down into Mexico to live free. And understand why we had that Mexican-American War, and why when we say remember the Alamo, we sound like idiots for people who wanted to perpetuate slavery in a nation, in a sovereign nation, that said slavery was outlawed. Our history is being taken from us, shielded from us, not allowed, and we can't draw those connections. How many Latinx people who were a part of the civil rights movement and marched right along with Dr. King and agreed with everything that was going on because they saw it as a way for them to be treated equally also? We don't talk about that history. This is why in a country we can say that a woman who has a Jamaican father is not Black. And did get Black people to co-sign it. And if I wanted to go further, I could even say her mother, who is of Indian descent. And I understand the Africans who went from Africa, made their way, right, going east, and populated India and Asia and Australia. The foolery is real out here. And I sometimes say to myself, I understand now why DeSantis and others want us to stop teaching. Why teachers can call you and say that your child should not be in an honors history program. Or we don't really want them to know. We're living in a in a society where if we can hide it from you, that's important. Stop solely depending on lower class brick and mortar school course books for your total education. That is true. I don't think that there's ever a time that I don't tell someone to go pick up a book. I'm reading all the time. Sometimes I'll just come to my desk and I pull something up and I will sit here for an hour or two and I read and I read and I read and I research and I study. I spent probably 3 weeks ago, I spent 2 weeks going over research because I'm tired of people doing improper research. I'm tired of people telling me I'm researched. I know what I'm talking about. And 2 minutes into the discussion, you realize they have no idea what they're talking about. They're leaning to their own understanding. There are things in history I don't agree with, I hate happened. But the fact is, I have to accept it as the fact that it is because the narrator, the first person source, lived it. And we can't allow it to hurt our feelings that someone like, say, Thomas Jefferson, right, could write the Declaration of Independence and still have a secret private room where he kept his slave lover, because he never married her, who just happened to look like his wife because his wife and her shared the same father. A man who believed that all men are created equal did not see blacks and black people as men and women per se. And he wrote this in his own words. History is painful. History is shocking. History can sometimes floor you. But the truth of the matter is, we have to remember those men like Jose Maria Morelos. We have to remember these people who stood up and said, hey, you know what? This ain't right. This is not right. And had the courage to reach out to others in the world at a time where that was unusual and say, let's come together for equality. The very equality and the patriotism that you're espousing in America should be for everybody. But here we are. We're still lost because we won't go, and as this person said on this viral video, We have come to the conclusion that we don't need our history. We don't need to know who we are, where we came from. That's not important. Just keep going forward. And every time I turn around, we're revisiting some historical lie. It surfaces again. Barbara Dick Gregory once said, racism has a long memory. Because they read. These think tanks that are throughout this country who came up with that Project 2025. You think that that was done in one generation? You think that that's one person? No, these are people who have sat there for years, decades, and tried to figure out a way around any law, any progressive change. We got to do better. We got to do better. This hour went pretty quick. I thank all of you all who joined us tonight. I hope you got something from this lesson. Please go out, try to the books I put on there. I'm sure you can find them on Amazon, but if you can find them places also on the internet that are free and easy for you to reach, that's fine too. I just want you to. I know books cost. Speaking of, I know it because I have a book out that's $40. But here's the thing. I want you to go and get the stuff that you need. I want you to do better. I want you to learn. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm gonna get out of here because it's an hour. Pastor Reyes, I see you. No, hey, thank you for joining us, Pastor Reyes. I really do appreciate you being in the session. To watch the full broadcast tonight. Thank you, Tina, for your input. I really do appreciate you all. Please feel free to share this episode. If you didn't ask a question tonight, drop a question. I promise you I'll answer it in our chat throughout what we're doing. And we're going to go forward. Still working on my second book. If you haven't gone out and got the first one, please go out and get the first one. 101 Black History Question Challenge. Still out there. It's on Amazon and it's on Lulu Books. Go out there. I saw, I forget who it was, older educator. I posted it earlier today. I think I posted an Erudition, and she was saying the same thing that I'm saying. Let's not start our history at 1619. Let's remember that Africans' history is world history, and that history started thousands of years ago, and it did not start in just 1619. All right, that's my little bit, to leave with you and shameless plug. All right, until I see you again, God willing, next week, you all have a blessed and great rest of your weekend, and I thank you again for joining us, and I'm going to get on out of here. You all be blessed. Thank you.